Hi, everybody. Welcome to FedTrends. ISO 20000. A lot of companies are ISO 20000 certified. A lot of people have delivered projects that were ISO 20000 compliant. But what's it mean to get certified, and what's the standard really all about? Now, first off, ISO 20000 really talks about being ITIL compliant. So the IT infrastructure library is a best practices framework. There's all kinds of resources available on what that means. But ISO 20000 you can really think of is, let's make sure that we're ITIL compliant. Let's make sure we're delivering IT services that way. Now, here's what you need to understand that, but it's still an ISO standard, so there's some requirements if you're going to be certified. Here's what they are. You need to have an IT plan. That sounds simple and straightforward. We'll talk more about it, but a lot of times IT organizations don't necessarily have a strategic plan, or they're not part of a bigger picture corporate plan. The other aspect is, and this is really the foundation of ITIL, if you get that into all the details, is you need to know what services you're going to provide. You need to have a strategy. You need to have a catalog of what you're going to provide and decide what level of quality you want to deliver them at. Those are your key concepts. Follow ITIL, have a plan, and pay attention to the services you're providing. Now, first topic is the scope. If you're going to be ISO 20000 certified or go through that process, they're going to ask you what project or what part of IT in the organization or enterprise are you going to be underneath the certification. You want to pick something where you can control the variables. That might be a client project if you're entirely responsible for it, but more likely, it should be your internal IT organization. You can control that. It's too difficult or overly complex to roll out an ISO standard when it's a contract where it's a client environment where they get to control things. So pick your internal IT organization. Next, there are 279 requirements in ISO 20000. There's a whole bunch of shall statements. Basically, they fall into the topics of leadership and commitment. IT should actually be something that the organization leadership know about and talk about. That it needs to be planned, that you need to have defined roles and responsibilities, that you need to articulate what services you're actually providing, that you have to manage your assets, you have to manage the configuration of those things in your environment, that you need to define service levels. So if you say that you're going to give people new laptops, is it immediate? Is it a day? Is it a week? You have to decide how often, how quickly you provide services, or if they're available all the time or not, because that really drives how you design your overall IT enterprise. You have to decide, you have to determine, what supply and demand that you have, what suppliers you're going to use, where you're going to buy things. You have to have a plan around how you're going to design, build, and release new pieces of IT into the environment. You need to have a plan for user support, and you need to decide what is important from a security, availability, and continuity standpoint. Is your data so important that you can't lose any of it, or is it really just security that you want to make sure that your stuff doesn't get stolen? There's a lot of different areas of emphasis there, but those are things that you, as you go through the ITIL and ISO 20000 process, you just have to make some answers and some decisions for your organization. Now, when you get ready to implement, you're going to have a couple of different strategic groupings that are going to require thought and decisions. First off is, what is your IT plan and what is your strategy? So how are you going to lead IT? What services are you actually providing? You're probably going to outsource some things. I don't know too many people that have a different word processing solution and places where they store their emails other than a Microsoft cloud or an Amazon cloud. Once you outsource things, you can take credit for what they are doing and what's in your agreement with them. You also need to define the roles and responsibilities. Who's allowed to make IT purchasing decisions? Those are things that in an environment where none of that happens, you get non-standard things introduced. You get things that aren't done because people don't even know it was their responsibility. Now, you have to ask yourself, what do I want from IT? Do I want the absolute best service? Do I want it to be the least expensive? Do I want to prioritize making sure my employees can work So any issue that interrupts their ability to work gets fixed first. Do I want to prioritize customer satisfaction, regardless of whether it impacts their job or not? I just want their requirement fulfilled. Or is security the most important? Because if security is the most important, you might have some features you have to turn off. That plan, what do I want from my IT, you need to figure out. It's not always hard, and you can get started and always perfect it over time, but that's important because if you don't do that, you're going to answer a bunch of questions to get ISO 20000 compliant. They're going to ask you questions as you're filling out, policy statements, and you're not going to have the right answer. You're just going to have to come up with something. Next, you want to have a plan for your assets. What do you really want to track? That should be the lowest common denominator. Maybe it's just laptops. Maybe it's just user accounts. Don't get down the path of tracking every mouse and keyboard. Then configuration. You want to have a conversation about what is our configuration going to be. Is all of our data in Microsoft and all of our laptops we buy from vendor X? The reason in that is that you want to make sure that you don't have people in your organization going off and creating things, building things, or buying things that cause integration challenges. So that's the kind of intellectual ITIL underpinning of that practice. Next, you're going to need a service level strategy. Do I want to measure first call resolution? Do I want to measure errors in the environment? Do I want to measure uptime? How am I going to do that? What am I really going to measure? What's important to me? That's your IT plan and strategy. The other area that you need to put some thinking into, which is really the last one, is how are you going to manage your IT environment and report and track metrics and service levels? That's ongoing. After I have my plan, how am I making sure that I'm living up to that plan? And you can start simple. Here's what I would recommend. You want to ask yourself, what do I really need to measure based on what my plan says? Those metrics can be time to respond. Look, I just want to make sure that we got in touch with somebody when they had an issue or they had a request and they needed a new service, they needed a new account. All I care is that we got back to them quickly. Then start with that. Is it uptime? I just want to make sure that my email service is always available. Is it security compliance? Do I want to make sure that I have patches and that my passwords are being refreshed on a regular basis? Once you decide those metrics, you ask yourself, how do I report on that? And then how am I going to manage it? Are we going to have monthly or quarterly reviews? Some kind of checkpoint. And then in that checkpoint, you need to be ready to look at and track errors. When did we go wrong? When we said that we were going to be up all the time, if we had systems go offline, what happened? And also continuous improvement based on feedback and metrics. Where could we get better and what do we need to improve? The last key concept is, what are you going to be responsible for versus what your vendors are going to be responsible for? As soon as you decide that your cloud provider, a Microsoft or an Amazon, is going to handle maybe your data instance, the SLAs that you have with them are what determine the availability of your systems. You can take credit for all of that. So in the ISO documentation, as you're saying, hey, look, this is how I protect my security compliance. This is how I protect the availability of my information. You point to the agreement that you have signed, and you don't have to do more than that. So the big pieces are, have your plan about what your overall IT support needs to be, or your IT services in your enterprise, and then figure out how you're going to manage and report on that and what metrics you're going to track. Those are your key concepts, and if you've thought about that and have answers for that, your ISO 20000 process is going to be way easier than you thought it was. Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.